Hello, hello and welcome. I have to congratulate you guys. Congratulations, you made a good choice. I think from all those presentations room, you chose the best room. These chairs are the most comfortable chairs. So relax, because I think when you relax, then you can focus the best on what I'm going to talk to you about. And I asked the sound guy to keep the relaxing music running a little bit so it's even easier for you to relax. My name is Hausmann, and I want to present you a little bit about Qt WebKit and give you a bit of an idea of perspective and a couple of pointers to presentations in the coming days. So I work on WebKit as part of my job, and the people that work on WebKit we call ourselves the Web Kittens. So on top of that, I like kittens. I like cats. I'm a big fan of cats because cats have their own minds. They just do whatever they want to do, and this applies a little bit to the developers of WebKit as well. There's strong personalities there that have their own minds. My heart is still passionate about Qt as well. I still like to work on Qt as far as that's possible with my work on WebKit, and I'm really passionate about open source. This is where I'm coming from as a programmer, and I have a strong belief that open source of development is a superior model of developing software. And I'm lazy, I admit, so that picture is actually quite accurate for me. These slides are done in HTML itself, and I have to give credits to a guy who came up with this idea of how to do those slides in HTML. His name is Eirik Arvidsson. I don't know who he is, but I found it on the net that he had this brilliant idea of how to make slides in HTML. And in the presentation, in the slides, you will find kittens from time to time. Those come from QtOverload.com. So the background for my presentation are the recent trends that we see and that we are reflecting in our Qt development. This rapid change in the landscape of application development, the landscape around us that indicates that we're always online with whatever we're doing on our computers. I mean, even on airlines, on airplanes, on transatlantic flights, airlines are starting to offer internet services, so you can literally be online anywhere nowadays. And by being online, content comes from the network. It's more up-to-date than what we have, and what we have on our hard drives. And another key thing that we observe is that a differentiation in application development often happens in custom user interfaces. You can see this for example, on Windows. If you look at applications that come straight from the platform, like the media player, it looks different. The popular applications often look very different, or iTunes or Spotify. All of those applications, they have their custom UI. And so we place two key technologies on top of Qt that we think are enablers for you to write applications that follow this change in the industry. And one of them is Qt Quick. You may have heard of that in the keynote. And the other key technology that is kind of in parallel to that is what we see as Qt WebKit. It's the integration of WebKit with Qt, and partly also with Qt Quick. So the goal of my presentation here is that I want to get you interested. I want to raise a bit of interest in you. I want to tell you what WebKit is about, roughly, and I want to get you interested in using Qt WebKit in your application. And my secret plan really is to convince all of you guys to attend 3 other presentations that are going on tomorrow that are all about WebKit, application development with WebKit, HTML5. More about that later. But my goal is that I want to convince you guys to attend those presentations tomorrow. Don't attend the other presentations, they're boring. The WebKit ones tomorrow, they're really cool. I also want to encourage you, or my goal is at least that you feel encouraged after the presentation about WebKit as a project, that this is a very, very interesting project as such, that allows you to see what's going on there. It's a very accessible and open project. So the outline for this, I want to give a bit of an introduction. I want to explain why we, as in the people working on Qt, have chosen WebKit back then, a couple of years back. I want to give a rough overview of the architecture, just very high level. and the resulting benefits from this architecture, from this choice of WebKit. I'm going to highlight or just mention a couple of the, this is like for Excel spreadsheets, a couple of the HTML5 features that we say are working very well. I'm going to emphasize many times the importance of hybrid software development and highlight what's new in the latest releases. I'm going to talk about the roadmap, where we're going, and the community, and, well, lots of bullet points. But lastly, importantly, I'm going to tell you about the presentation, or I'm going to highlight again the presentations that you must attend tomorrow. So who here is, like, how many of them are, raise your hand if you're a programmer, if you like to write code. Oh, good, very good, fantastic, because then I'm going to not continue with boring slides and diagrams. I'm going to show you a little bit of code right away to give you a hands-on feeling for what WebKit and Qt are about. So I'm going to write a little, I write those slides in HTML, like I said, so I'm going to write a little, I'm going to do what I did actually when I started writing my slides. I'm going to start from scratch, write a little program that shows WebKit, and then I'm going to write 2-3 slides in HTML to show you how this is possible, to give you an idea of how those things come together. So I'm starting out with a very simple project in Qt Creator. Is a bit difficult to read. I think I may have to increase the font size a little bit. I know we should always do that beforehand. Okay, can you guys read that roughly? There's a main window. Okay, great. So this is a bare Qt application in Qt Creator. If I fire it up, it's just going to bring up a plain window. So I'm going to create a graphics view, and put in that graphics view, we're going to put WebKit into it, because that's sort of the foundation of my little presentation program. And I'm start by editing the profile, because I'm choosing to use WebKit. So I add this into the profile here. And I'll start by adding a couple of includes. I'm going to just include the entire of Qt GUI and the entire of Qt WebKit, because I'm really lazy. Remember the picture with the cat? I'll create a graphics view first, and a graphics scene, and put those together quickly. Make the graphics view the central widget in my window. I create a graphics scene. Associate that scene with my view. I'm going to create a graphics web view. This is the integration of WebKit in the graphics view. And I'm going to add this web view to the scene. Just any typo spotted? Where? Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Okay. So I'm just going to start quickly. I'm going to HTML. I'm going to write a bit of like hello world. This is like the first iteration, just so I can show a bit of something on the screen. Let's compile this quickly. Whoops. Oh yeah, the scene is not something I want to add. That was embarrassing. Right, so we have a little window. This is going to be my presentation program. It's too small. I'm going to make it bigger. And I'm going to make a way to exit the program again. So let's just go to the main. Instead of just calling show here, I'm going to call show maximized, so it comes up as a big window. And I want to be able to get out of the presentation program by pressing escape. So I'm going to just add a quick keyboard handler for that. So if somebody presses the escape key, I'm going to accept the event, and I'm going to close the window. or else I'm going to be a good citizen and call the base implementation of this. So if I run this now, I should be able to get a pretty big window that can show my slides, and I can press escape. And it doesn't disappear because I made a mistake. Oh, yeah. Let's try again. Good. Great. So I'm going to write I have now the shell in place, so I can show HTML content, very few lines of code. And I'm going to write my slides now in HTML itself. So I'm going to add a new file here, just a general text file. I'm going to call it index.html. And I'll just write here, hello world from index.html. And so I'm just going to change the program to show that file instead. And then instead of calling set.html on this graphics view, I'm just calling load with the URL. So I think this should have been the last thing to change. Yeah, so and now I can continue writing my slides in HTML. And the way I would like to write them is I would like to do something like this. I would like to be able to just write a div, and each div should be my slide. And in the slide, I would like to be able to start with my headline, the title of the slide. This is the first slide. And I want to be able to write the next slide in another div. So if I just show this, then it doesn't look that great. It's just one slide below the other. So I'm going to continue with a bit of CSS here. I'm going to take those slides, and all of the slide divs are of a certain class, the slide, so I can create a style sheet and say all of the slides should have an absolute position, all of those divs. And that'll place them on top of each other. So now the two slides are on top of each other. And the next thing I need to do in order to continue with my presentation is to introduce the concept of a current slide, so that all of the slides are on top of each other, but only the current slide is the one that is visible. And the way I'm going to do this is by introducing an opacity, and I said all the slides are invisible by default. They have an opacity of 0. And then I'm going to introduce the concept of a current slide. And I'm going to tie, let me go back here, I'm going to tie the current slide to part of the URL. So I'm going to tie the current slide to the so-called fragment or the hash of the URL. If you see this hash, I can make it add a 0 here. This should be my first slide. If I choose 1, it should show the second slide. 3, it should show the third slide. So I'm just going to start with the first slide. And the way I'm going to then select the first slide is by using a special selector. Using this selector, everything I define in here will apply to this div element that is currently selected as part of the URL. And I'm going to say that is going to be my visible slide. That should have an opacity of 1. So all the slides are on top of each other. They're all hidden, but the one that has the same ID as the one that is in the URL, that'll be visible. And I need to give my slides an ID. So this should be the first one, and this should be the second one. So if I show this now, I should only see the first slide. And if I went back here and changed this to a 1, I should see the second slide. Almost there. Change this back to 0. So almost there means I just need a way to go from one slide to the other. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to change the URL. I'm going to change the number after the hash. I write really horrible HTML. I often forget to close tags. That's a special permission that developers working on WebKit have. They are allowed to write really broken HTML. But just in case you're wondering. So on key press, I'm just going to define a very simple function here that will be called when I press a key. And the current slide, this hash in the URL, is something I can query from a special property, window.location.hash. That'll tell me what the current URL is. So if I do an alert, it's going to print what that slide is. So you can see if I run this now, and I press a key, aha! Now the variable current slide has what is the current slide, basically. But I don't want that hash there. I'm going to remove the hash, and then I'm just going to increment it by 1 and change the value of this location property. So the way I remove the hash, I'm lazy. I'm just going to call a substring from 1, so I'm going to just remove that. I'll wrap this thing also into a number, JavaScript, because then I can write, our next slide is current slide plus 1. And then I can write window.location.hash is next slide. And so this, when I press a key, will increment this thing at the end of the URL, the number, and change it from 0 to 1, for example, or from 1 to 2. And just by changing that, the CSS up here will be reevaluated. And suddenly, the opacity equals 1 value applies to a different div. And I'll show you how that looks like. I'll just add a third slide just for the fun of it. This is the third slide. So if I run this now, I can press a key and it goes to the second slide. It hides the other one and it goes to the third slide. Almost there. I'll make a little bit of good looks, so I'm going to add a transition so that I can fade in between the slides. And the way I'm going to do this is by using a WebKit feature called CSS animations. I'm going to say that the opacity, when the opacity of a slide changes from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0, it should be a smooth change. It should be should increment. It should be gradually move from 0 to 1 instead of just change right away. So I'm going to tell WebKit, hang on a minute, when you change the value of opacity, make it a transition. Transition from the old value to the new one, don't just go there straight away. And I can say that the duration of this transition should be a second, so that it's an animation. And that is basically my presentation program, because now I can do, you see, transition between the slides. In fact, this is exactly what I've been using in my real slides. This is the very same technique. I've enhanced it a little bit with adding keyboards back and forth and so, but this is exactly the same principle that I've done. And as you can see, it is actually quite simple to combine WebKit features and HTML5-ish stuff with animations and transitions with a little bit of a C++ application that allows you to put things in place. So back to my slides, or my presentation. Let me just skip over that. So these transitions between the things, this is exactly this opacity that you can change. Let me go straight to the boring slides now. High level. What you've seen was a very implementation. From a high level, the WebKit project is an independent software project. And it is by de facto the most popular web content engine on mobile devices. I've listed a couple of names there, but you have certainly heard of it, I'm sure. But this is basically pretty much a de facto standard. And if you look at the rate at how new features are implemented in web standards, they're often first implemented in WebKit, and then they're reusable. You can see those often coming in Safari or in Chrome as browsers. And there's quite a few applications out there that also, commercial applications that use Qt WebKit, in fact, to embed web content. So next time you use Google Earth, for example, and you click on a hotspot where there's some information, you'll see a little pop-up that shows text and everything, and that's done using Qt WebKit. Or if you dive into a second reality, into Second Life, they've recently implemented support for like putting web content in there as well. That's also done using Qt and using Qt WebKit. Why did we choose Qt WebKit? Why did we even bother with this? A few years back, we had to make a choice. We really knew that we needed to integrate Qt and web technologies. And we knew that WebKit as a big and running project had its roots in the Qt project and in the Qt HTML rendering engine. And we thought that is a really good basis because the code was basically in line with what Qt could do. And the developers behind KHTML, they went by the time we made that choice, and they are still now working for Qt R&D. In fact, the head of or the chief architect of Qt, Lars Knoll, he's one of the people who actually wrote KHTML initially, and so he was obviously influential in that decision. And today, WebKit is still a good choice because Qt WebKit is basically one of the leading ports of WebKit in the WebKit project. We are usually right next to the others when it comes to implementing new things and catching up on standards and the like. A very brief look at the architecture. In this bluish core, you can see these are the main components that you might see from a big distance in WebKit. This is web core, which is the rendering part. This is the thing that implements the HTML5 features, various HTML5 features. It implements CSS, transitions, animations, and all of that stuff. And in order to implement my on-key press handler in my site application, I need JavaScript. So in WebKit, that is usually JavaScript core. You can also use V8 as an engine with WebKit generally. And the third component that is fairly visible to you is the so-called Web Inspector, which is a great tool to debug your web content as you integrate it. So we've taken those bits and pieces and we wrapped them around the Qt API. We have a Qtish API that is easy to use, and we're also using Qt for all the things that WebKit needs from the platform. When it comes to text rendering, to rendering primitives, tables, colors, text encoding, to access the network, that's all done by the Qt layer inside of WebKit. So we use the Qt libraries for that. We also use the Qt mobility libraries to determine the current location and to send events about whether you're online or offline and the like. So we use Qt WebKit. With Qt WebKit, we use everything in Qt that is there, pretty much. And all of that sits on top of our cross-platform layer, so you get the same features in Qt WebKit on all the platforms that Qt usually runs on. And so the benefits for you, as somebody who is considering maybe Qt WebKit to decide, is that it is something that really makes it easy to embed web content that you control, that you can customize. It's a great way to really to stay in touch with web standards, and when new things get introduced, you will be able to use them right away in your Qt application. And we also have an integration in Qt WebKit that allows you to embed Qt objects and access them from JavaScript, and goes in both directions. So from JavaScript you can call into C++, and from C++ you can call into JavaScript actually, running inside this WebKit sandbox, and that gives some very interesting setups and some interesting paradigms that can be very powerful. So in a nutshell, when to use Qt WebKit? When would I recommend to use it? If you have dynamic content, if you want to have things dynamically from the network, remember always online, then this is probably a very good choice, because WebKit is all about content rendering. It's very, very good at taking content, text, and images, and just generally rich content and rendering it. You can also not only show your content itself, but you can also make your UI if you want in HTML and in JavaScript, and a lot of the latest features in CSS and in HTML make it very easy to make user interfaces. You can, of course, build your own web browser. I mean, if you make your own device and you want to have a web browser, it's not too difficult to get something it's actually quite easy, in fact, to write a web browser on top of Qt WebKit. Another interesting situation is that if your development team does not only consist of hardcore C++ programmers, but also has people that just have more experience with web technologies, then that might be an interesting consideration to create a team, a development team that has expertise in both, in web development technologies as well as in C++. And that makes Qt WebKit an interesting choice as well as a foundation for your application. We also have a very simple integration of Qt WebKit into Qt Quick or in QML. There's a web view component that you can just place into your Qt Quick application, and it renders web content. It's really, really simple, fairly straightforward to use. With Qt Quick, it comes with a little demonstration of browser where you can see how nice and fast this actually works. Back to this big outline. I'd like to just highlight a couple of those features. I'm going to mention a couple of buzzwords so you know what the scope is and what we currently have and don't have. Currently well working in WebKit, or in the Qt port of WebKit, are CSS animations, transitions, and effects. You can even have quite advanced effects in there. That's working really well. As you can see, the transitions between the slides, that's one of those. We have a fairly well-working canvas. Tomorrow there's a presentation by Benjamin, who, among other things, also gives you a little bit of a cool demo about what the canvas can actually do, and that's working really well in Qt WebKit. We have support for the so-called application cache that allows you to that allows as a web developer to define what resources belong to a web application, and that can be cached locally. If you build Qt WebKit with Qt Mobility, then you will also be notified through JavaScript when your device or your computer goes online and offline. That can be a very useful thing to know as you develop a web application. And we also have support for local storage and this web database. Local storage is a very interesting, very nice mechanism that is a good replacement for cookies. I prefer to eat cookies because web cookies, on the other hand, are a very cumbersome and difficult to use mechanism. Local storage, on the other hand, is a great replacement for what other people use cookies for. Currently not working all that well in Qt WebKit and still in progress, but something that we would really like to finish soon is support for WebGL. That's going to open some really, really cool perspectives, I think. And WebSockets as well, as a good replacement for the dubious XML HTTP requests, which can be quite difficult to use as well. And web workers, if you want to offload heavy JavaScript processing. That doesn't block the UI. But this is currently work in progress. Whoops. You think it's... thank you. So if you ever had, to give you an example where all of this, or most of these features are used, is if you've taken a native at the demo pavilion, you can see some of the. If you launch the OV store, the OV store is actually written using Qt WebKit. The whole OV store application is actually written in JavaScript and HTML and CSS. And try it out. It's actually a really nice and very fluent application. So if you want to get an idea what you can do with Qt WebKit, hands-on, walk over to the demo pavilion, take one of those Nokia N8s and take a look at the OV store. I think that's a very nice example of a successful application. I'd like to again emphasize this other development model of hybrid development, where you write heavy logic or where you push your limits a bit on the C++ side. It can be very good to do heavy processing. There are certain things that you can only do in native code. Sound processing, for example, currently is something Fourier transformations and the like. This is sometimes in your application you can only do these things in C++. But you can combine this with the dynamicness of the web, and that makes the hybrid model, I think, very interesting. And we added a very powerful bridge that allows you to access JavaScript from within JavaScript. You can access signals, slots, and properties of Qt objects. So even of your own objects, if you make your own objects, you can expose them very easily to JavaScript. And that's a way for you to escape out of the sandbox of security in the web model. Which is something which is a very powerful thing, because you can really push to new limits. You can get out of the sandbox of JavaScript, and you can call into your own custom objects and read properties. It's important to keep in mind that for that model, you should really have tight control over the content itself. Otherwise, you have a security problem. But often you have that. Often you know exactly where you get your data from. Often you're the one who runs the server that delivers the data, which you then can change. So with all these features and all this package and everything, it's important to know when can you get this into your hands, when you can actually start using this. And therefore, I'd like to just briefly go through a bit the release model or the release history of Qt WebKit. We introduced Qt WebKit as a module in Qt 4.4, and we've been releasing it together with new minor releases of Qt that always came with a newer version of WebKit. And we found the need to be able to release WebKit more often. The web is changing rapidly. It's moving forward rapidly, and WebKit itself is being developed at an incredible pace. So we would like to be able to get improvements and enhancements in WebKit into your hands quicker, also into Nokia's hands. So that's why we've started to make this a separate module. I've blogged about this a while ago, but I'd like to really emphasize this. The separation is something we've started with Qt 4.7 by introducing a different versioning scheme. So since Qt 4.7, we call the version of Qt WebKit that is in Qt WebKit 2.0. And the next version is going to be called 2.1 and 2.2 and the like. And so we are currently working on Qt WebKit 2.1, which we're going to make available independently of Qt. So you don't have to wait until Qt 4.8 is out, but you can get it earlier. And in fact, we are also releasing this to the Symbian, to the Nokia Symbian and MeeGo platforms independently. And in fact, if you're using Linux as your development platform, you may have noticed that some of the Linux distributions also have started packaging WebKit separately. However, there's one important thing to remember. If you rely on commercial support, if you use the commercial support that Qt or Nokia offers for Qt and for WebKit, then this only applies to the releases of WebKit that we bundle together with Qt. We won't stop doing that. We'll continue to do that. So the next minor version of Qt 4.8 will come still with WebKit, and that's the one that will be subject to commercial, or covered by our commercial support. So where are we? I'd like to highlight a few features. And afterwards, I'm going to talk a bit about the community and WebKit as a project, and why this is also something quite interesting. So in Qt 4.7, we've put our development focus when it comes to WebKit on mobile features, mostly mobile features. We've added support for a feature in graphics WebView called tiling that makes scrolling and zooming a much smoother and responsive operation. Tiling is basically a mechanism to cache rendered web content. So whenever you need to redraw whatever the graphics WebView displays, instead of calling down to WebKit and saying, oh, please re-render this table and this paragraph and this image, we cache that into an intermediate layer. And those are little tiles that are sprinkled all over the viewport. They're a little bit bigger of the viewport. And so when you zoom or when you scroll, you can just scale or redraw those tiles, and you don't have to go back down to rendering all the complex content that you have. And we've also added support for something that's called frame flattening. That is really a feature that comes from other mobile browsers, and we've we've implemented this upstream in WebKit trunk. The purpose of frame flattening is for mobile use, where you have a very limited screen size, and where web content that has frames is very difficult to use. With frames, you usually have scroll bars. Frames often have content that is very big, and so the browser starts displaying scroll bars. And scroll bars are something that are in turn difficult to use on devices with small physical dimensions, where you have to use touch input fingers. Scroll bars are really difficult to hit. So there's this feature in WebKit that is called frame flattening that was introduced by I think the iPhone or the Android browser initially, and we have re-implemented that in the upstream WebKit that basically takes frames and just expands them totally and removes the scroll bars. And this is in our API. This is a simple setting that you can enable, and that's particularly meaningful thing to use when you use Qt WebKit on devices with small resolutions and touch input. There was a blog entry. If you look at planet.webkit.org, there was a blog entry not too long ago about all those mobile features in Qt WebKit that summarize nicely what you can do there. This is just one of the examples. We've also added support for what is called accelerated compositing. That makes CSS animations a very smooth and fast operation. By caching, again, the content, and when you animate something, when you animate, for example, transition from one slide to another with opacity changes, you actually don't re-render the content itself, but you just composite it. And we do that in an accelerated way, and that makes animations a very smooth thing. That feature is enabled by default, but it's a very useful thing to have. We've also extended the support for this hybrid model, where you can not only access signal slots and properties of Qt objects, but you can also exchange images between JavaScript and your native code, which makes up for a very interesting models where you can dynamically generate content pixmaps and transfer them to JavaScript and the other way around. So you can, for example, create an image in the HTML5 canvas and then transfer it over to your C++ site and then do manipulations with it and render it. We've also spent a lot of time optimizing the rendering performance and then the loading performance. And so if you compare older versions of Qt WebKit with what is in Qt 4.7, you will, I think, be very pleased to see that this is a lot faster and smoother. So going forward, we also we started to be a bit more open about what we work on and what we think is important, and that is what we call the roadmap. And so I'm going to show you right away, but just in general, if you want to find out what we think is important for the development of Qt WebKit, what we think is coming and what we want to work on, you can find out about this in our public Jira bug tracker. You can go to this URL, and then you can select roadmap there, and you can select all versions, and then you will find out the roadmap. But instead of talking, I'm going to just demonstrate it to you to show you how it looks like. So if you go to bugreports.qt.nokia.com, our public Jira, and you choose Browse Projects, you can find conveniently at the bottom the project Qt WebKit. And this is what we use to track the work that we do on features, on high-level features and upcoming things. So here you find a roadmap as a convenient filter. And you can change the scope here to all versions, and you get a bit of a better overview. And so the way we've organized our roadmap for Qt WebKit development is that you start out with releases, so features that are tied to specific releases. As an example, we have a couple of those registered here for what was delivered in Qt 4.6, and then what is in Qt WebKit 2.0, features that are done, and then there's current work on Qt WebKit 2.1. And a little bit of also on 2.2. But then it becomes interesting, because then we have started doing a different way of road mapping. Instead of promising features in a specific release, we've turned things a bit around and said we're not going to make empty promises. So we're not going to say, oh, we're working on this and this release, and then it'll be there, and maybe it won't be. Because in reality, software development is very difficult to predict. It's very difficult to plan and predict. So instead, we've decided to organize our roadmap in two segments, in time and in market needs. And in time, meaning we divide the year into quarters. So quarter 1, or quarter 4, 2010, quarter 1, 2011, and quarter 2, quarter 3. And we've identified, or we've sorted the things that we think we want to work on coming up into identified market needs and critical market needs. And those are items that we think are critical or important for the success of Qt WebKit in application development out there. And so if you browse this, I won't take up too much time on that, but if you browse to this, you can see that we've identified what we think is really important. So, for example, there is this work going on in WebKit that is dubbed as WebKit 2, which is all about separating out the processing of rendering and layouting into a separate instance, separate process, to always have a responsive UI. And we think that this is, for our purposes, this becomes really important in the second half of the next year. And we really hope that by then we should have something that is done. And so based on these things, we prioritize our development resources as well. So feel free to browse through this roadmap. This is what we constantly change. We review this once a month, and we polish and change it once a month based on different input and new things. And we are certainly interested in your input. And a lot of these items are also up for grabs. So if you want to start working on something, this is a public Jira. You can register. You can say, hey, now I started working on this, and you can start contributing this to WebKit. So I'm going to explain a bit now how this works with WebKit and contributing. And the basic premise is that WebKit is a community of developers. WebKit is a community of developers, and they're actually tame kittens. They're really, really tame and nice people there that work there. And the community works by a couple of very basic principles. The first one is that the WebKit project does not have official releases. If you go to webkit.org and you look for something to download, you're not probably going to find something. Instead, WebKit consists of sub-projects. They're often also called ports. So there's a build of WebKit that compiles with Apple's Safari browser, and there's a build of WebKit that compiles, or that is used with Google's Chromium browser, and then there's another build of WebKit that works with GTK. And then there's also one that works with Qt. That's the one we work on. And then there's one that works with the Enlightenment Foundation libraries. And so on. There's many different ports, and all of those have sub-projects, and they release independently. They release whenever they are done with whatever they're working on. And in the meantime, they will all work on the same development line, which we try very hard to keep stable. So there's a lot of infrastructure, QA infrastructure, and there's a strong culture of quality to keep that line stable. And the result is an incredibly fast pace of development. The way the project is moving is incredibly fast. How quickly iterations of a standard are turned into an implementation and then covered by tests and releasable is very, it can be very surprising. And the way all of this works is by using this old-fashioned communication protocol called IRC. We WebKit developers hang out on IRC. We hang out in a Qt WebKit, in a hash WebKit channel and in a hash Qt WebKit channel. The hash WebKit channel is most populated in the US time zones usually. That's where most traffic is, and in the European time zones, I think we get a little more traffic in our Qt WebKit channel. So if you have questions about the development and the like, this is actually a good place to start out. And there's a fair amount of traffic also on our mailing lists. So if you'd like to subscribe to those and to get an idea, to get help, or to just join the development, that's also a great place to start discussions. Just look at lists.webkit.org. You find an overview of the available mailing lists. There's a Qt-specific one. There's a general WebKit development one. There's one where you can find job postings for WebKit jobs, like hiring and the like. There's quite a bit of things there. So those are the cornerstones of the community, really. We use IRC to communicate, very ad hoc, very informal, and we use mailing lists for, well, when you're not online. And so the way you would actually contribute a change to Qt WebKit, or to WebKit as a whole, is through a very slightly formal but straightforward process. Every patch initially goes through Bugzilla, bugs.webkit.org. You get the source code, you do a change, you're done with your change, and you create a bug in the WebKit Bugzilla and attach your patch there. That's the first thing. And then you mark your patch up for review. You ask the WebKit community, please review my patch, because any change that goes into WebKit must be reviewed. There's a strong culture of code review, and so you mark your patch up for review, say, please review this patch, I'd like to contribute to WebKit, and then somebody will look at it and will review it and will give you comments. And if you experience that your patch is just dangling there and nothing is happening, hop onto IRC and nag us a little bit. Sometimes we miss out things, so in case it takes a bit longer, don't hesitate to hop onto IRC and ask a WebKit reviewer to review your code. And it is very common to have multiple iterations, so don't, if your patch is denied or if the review is denied, that's not a bad thing. It just merely says that please do another iterations, please change these and these things, and then the patch will be okay. Then it adheres to the coding guidelines and to the concepts that we use in WebKit. And so once the patch has been approved, you will get a so-called R+, review plus, and your patch will be automatically committed. So in order to contribute something to WebKit, you can be anybody. You don't need to work for a specific company. You don't need to have a special commit access for anything. All you need is an account at WebKit Bugzilla, which anybody can do, really. Those slides will be available offline. So I'm putting a link here. At webkit.org contributing.html, you can find a very nice detailed document that explains the step-by-step things that you can follow if you want to contribute changes and code to WebKit. Another important thing is bugs. The way we handle bugs in WebKit is not uniform to everybody. So if you find a bug in Qt WebKit, or generally find something as a result of using Qt WebKit, here's how you report the bug in Qt WebKit. The first thing is, don't go to bugreports.qt.nokia.com. At bugreports.qt.nokia.com, we track and collect bugs in Qt. Bugs in WebKit, we track in the WebKit Bugzilla project. So instead, you can find a nice document written up by a colleague of mine at track.webkit.org/wiki/qtwebkitbugs. That is a document in the WebKit wiki that explains what we expect from a good bug report, what are the things we look for that make it easier for us to quickly process and triage and fix the bug. And you will find detailed instructions there. And at the end of the day, you can use this shortcut at the end of the slide there, webkit.org/new-qtwebkit-bug, to quickly go to a template in WebKit's Bugzilla that has pretty much everything filled out, so you can start typing in your bug report. And then we will find it easily. It has the Qt keyword set, it has the Qt in the title. So then when your bug report is entered into this jungle of Bugzilla, then we will find it because it has the necessary keyword. So please use this URL when you report bugs. Don't report the bugs in bugreports.qt.nokia.com. Yes, so this leads me to my last part, the last part of my presentation, which is convince you guys that you have to continue. You must attend a couple of presentations tomorrow. Those, just like this little kitten really wants to play with you, I really want you to attend a couple of presentations tomorrow that are really, really good. And they build perfectly onto this introduction. The first one is by Noam Rosenthal, tomorrow at 9 o'clock for the early birds or the people that are jet-lagged. In room B, Noam is presenting about hybrid software development with Qt and Qt WebKit. It's a very interesting presentation that outlines when it makes sense to write a pure Qt application, when it makes sense to write a pure WebKit or HTML application, web application, and when in particular it makes sense to combine the two. So he has some hands-on information and guidelines. When does it make sense to use what? He will help you with making a decision, basically. And then Benjamin, at 1:15 after lunch, also in room B. It's very easy, you just need to stay in that room. He's going to talk about the HTML5 features. He's going to present HTML5 as a platform for web application development, highlighting all the key features that are really, really useful, that exist in HTML5, because that's a huge thing, but there's a couple of standards that are really important. Those are the ones to learn. He has a great summary of those with examples that show you practically what it means to use them. So I can recommend that. And right after that, Benjamin continues with helping you to make things fast, to help you profile your Qt WebKit-based application, how to find out if something is slow, what to make sure of, what to be aware of when using Qt WebKit and designing your HTML, so that it runs fast and responsive and at a fast pace. So those three presentations tomorrow, 9 o'clock, 1:15 and 3:15. Each of those after a break, either after breakfast, after lunch, or after the coffee break in room B. It's all where you have. That's the only place you have to be tomorrow. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. And I think we have time for questions if you happen to have any. And I think Marcel is going to come around with a microphone, so please don't talk until he holds the microphone in front of your face so that everybody can hear the question.
I have two questions. The first one, very short. What keyboard layout do you use? Because you type very fast.
Oh, the keyboard layout on this laptop is actually physically a Norwegian layout, but I use a US layout. The US keyboard layout is superior because of the / and.
And the second one, I did some C++ and Qt WebKit integration, and I found out that WebKit becomes thoroughly confused when you throw C++ exceptions. And I wanted to know if there is any work in progress to support exceptions better, like in the Qt script bridge, for example.
I have to be honest with you there. No. At least exceptions are something that we usually, they're so exceptional for us that we usually don't deal with them. But there's currently nothing in there. But that still sounds like a sensible thing to support, and it may not be too difficult to do that either. So that sounds like a really good idea for a feature for you to contribute, maybe. Because you're running into this problem, and I think it's a solvable thing. I mean, we've had a similar problem in Qt itself when people started to throw exceptions from within signals, slots that are connected to signals. And so we had to do a catch-all in Qt, in the depth of the Qt kernel, and then forward this. And so this is something that's been solved, that is, I think, very solvable. But I have to admit it's not something that is in our focus right now.
Okay, thank you.
I have 3 questions. First is possible to access to document object model from C++ code?
Yes. If you look at the API of the QWeb frame class, you will find that there's a function called document element. And so that is sort of the entry point that allows you to access the document, the content. But we have decided when we designed this API that we would not take the whole DOM specification, which is a huge thing with tons of interfaces. We decided not to make bindings for that. That would create a huge API that would blow up the library by many, many kilobytes or even maybe megabytes. So instead, we decided to make a very simplified API that still allows you to access 95% of what the pure DOM specification gives you. And we've simplified it down to basically two classes. One of them is called Qt WebElement, and that is really the core of the class. That's a wrap around a generic element in the DOM. With that, you can change attributes, you can change the style, you can ask for the style. There's a couple of convenience functions. You can change things like the content inside, you can nest them. So that's an API that allows you to manipulate the content programmatically, and it also allows you to introspect it. And we combined that with this query selector implementation in WebKit that allows you to very easily find an element in your document. So if you look into the Qt Web Frame API, look for document element and look for find element. That allows you to conveniently find something in your content using CSS, actually.
Okay, it's very interesting. The second question is, how do you keep all WebKit versions synchronized? I mean that there's change in, for example, in Qt WebKit, and there's a change in Safari WebKit version, and how do you synchronize everything? So
the way the development is synchronized is by all of us web kittens. If you remember the picture with the little kid, we all work in the same place. We all work in the WebKit main line of development, also called it the WebKit trunk. So we work all in the same upstream Subversion repository, in fact. And from there, all of the sub-projects, they branch off, stabilize for a little while, and then they release.
And the last question is the HTML code of presentation. Is it only WebKit code, or it's HTML standard?
What you've seen there with this WebKit transition is a WebKit extension.
And the rest is HTML standard, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Just one quick note. If you want to see another example of a nice presentation done in HTML itself, you can go to html5rocks.com. html5rocks.com, not the rock that is, but it's really cool. html5rocks.com. There's a very nice presentation about HTML5 itself, written in HTML5 itself, and that's all using not using WebKit extension as far as I know.
Okay, two questions. What's the difference between this Qt WebKit and the Qt Web Runtime? Or is it the same thing?
The one builds on top of the other. So Qt WebKit is the underlying framework with Qt that the Qt Web Runtime uses. So the Qt Web Runtime uses Qt WebKit to show the content. The Qt Web Runtime basically adds the runtime part of the package, which means it offers an installation system, a packaging system for web runtime applications, and it offers a couple of device-specific APIs. But it complements Qt WebKit. It builds on top of it, basically.
Okay. The second question is about the deployment of these WebKit applications. Assuming that a company wants to build a closed source application, how is it possible to hide those HTML and JavaScript files on the device, so people won't be able to, see and copy those? Is the intention?
Is it sufficient for you to just make it harder to? I mean, instead of encrypting it super securely, is it for you enough to just make it very difficult to find the data? Because then what you could do is just embed all of the content in a Qt resource file, and then it'll be compiled into binary, and it'll be part of your application binary, At which
it's still kind of a text in binary?
No, it's actually compressed.
Okay.
Which is a kind of a scrambling, if you want so.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way, actually, to just put it into a Qt resource file. Makes it very easy to deploy, easy to access, and it's extremely difficult to get the data out of it. It's possible,
okay.
But it's hard enough, I would say.
Okay, good.
So we have one last question.
I have written a service application on Windows and a daemon application on Linux, and I'm wondering if I can use the WebKit as a user interface for this. Does this make sense? Do I have to make a web server inside the server application to do the communication?
You could write your own web server. I mean, it probably makes sense. I recommend you to get up early tomorrow morning, be at 9 o'clock in room B, where Noam can tell you a bit more about that. In general, it probably makes sense. You could write your own little web server in your application. Maybe you can also just reuse another HTTP serving component for that. It's probably easier than trying to introduce your own protocol to transfer the data.
So we have to stop for now. If you have questions for Simon, just go to him. And thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much.